Hi, nice to be with you today. So I'm indeed, as I have been already introduced by Merce, I'm not going to come back to the presentation, but maybe to explain to you, because I'm not sure everyone is absolutely familiar with Energy Cities, as we are a network of cities. What we work on, it's really mainly also, and I mean, we will use a lot of your um, material that you are gathering in your knowledge community, because that's what we also do, is trying to share with our membership the learnings that they have when they do new pilots on their transition at local level. What is important to maybe mention about Energy Cities is that we have our own vision of what we need to be performing now from a city's perspective. And it's really trying to work both on the topics, meaning that we really need to have a very wise use of resources, whether they are food, energy, material, common land and spaces, but also that to do any kind of transformation, we need to have three levers of change. One is about changing governance, the other one is about building concrete alternatives, and the last one is fostering cultural changes. So the activities of Energy Cities are all basically linked to those three big levers of change that are needed when you really want to transform society. And this is important because this is the way we structure all of our work. Now, what have we done on sufficiency? So we worked on sufficiency within a very large coalition of now almost 100 partners that have been signing a big manifesto that we have done last year before the EU election, to try to put sufficiency as a concept, which I will come back later on, at the heart of the EU policy, because we really feel that there is a missing pillar in general in looking at all policy, and that if we don't include sufficiency in the future framing of the EU policy, we will fail most of our goals. The first one will be on climate, but it will not be the only one. And this is why we have built up this very wide coalition of different organizations calling for a shift in how we do policy, and calling for sufficiency to be at the heart of the 2040 climate, energy, and material framework, meaning basically to revise the entire political context. To go back on that, so why often we do speak about sufficiency only on energy first. That's a big problem, because sufficiency as such has nothing to do with energy. It's a kind of a proxy when we just understand sufficiency only on energy. Sufficiency, it's what we want. The way we want to frame it is to ask the question first about what do we really need. So it's called by many philosophers on like the good enough principle. The idea that actually we first need to ask ourselves, what do we really need that? Do we really need to have this video conference? Well, I'm not sure. Maybe we should have answered differently, and maybe that's the first sufficiency principle that we should have applied. Do we need more hubs? That it's another question. And if we start by asking ourselves that question, it quite changed a lot of the things and the activities that we are currently doing. So I invite you to try that question each time you will start entering into a meeting, and or more importantly, it's more about anything you buy, anything the very good example is, for example, is when we say that we want to have 25 degrees in the entire house, when actually you only need 25 degrees on your desk, where you don't move, but everywhere else, but it's just that we have not designed the heating system in a house or in an office to only heat the place where you are actually sitting. And then we are heating the entire space, but actually you don't really need to heat the roof, or you don't need to heat part of your own building where you move, like the corridors or maybe the stairs. So this is the kind of questions that we want to put at the heart of all our practices, and then of course on policy. The other thing is that what we have discovered with all the partners that have signed the manifesto is that basically in all scenarios, every scenarios that that are based, every scenarios that are underlying the different targets, the different directive, the European Commission is always there is always a part on sufficiency in those scenarios where there is a reduction of needs. So there is always an assumption, even if in the most technocratic scenario, there is always an assumption that some of the needs will be reduced. And it's not linked to energy efficiency, but really some of the needs will be reduced. But there is never any kind of policy that is attached to that. It's like it will happen. We don't know exactly why, but at some point it will happen. The needs will be reduced. We don't exactly know how, but so here I put two different scenarios that have been built, but the one that we have really worked the most, because it's one of the most interesting modeling exercise that exists. And also because they have really, it's ADEME, so it's the National French Energy Agency. And they are really known and renowned, first, to be a very big advocate of the sufficiency principle in general, but also to have really very strong and robust model of modeling to try to do prospective scenarios. And in those scenarios, so they have 4 of them, there is an English version of it. And I really encourage you to go and to have a closer look to what kind of assumption they are under each of those scenarios, because it's very helpful to try to design policy tools and policy instruments. I also put here the definition of the 3 scenarios that are behind the targets under the climate law in the EU. So in 2020, the European Commission, before to put a new climate law, and for the entire Fit for 55 package, and now for the next package that they want to do for 2040, they use 3 different scenarios, much less sufficiency in those scenarios, but however, there is some part which are still supposed to be about reduction of our needs, with no attached EU policy. So that's a big problem. Now I will go on to one of the most interesting reports that exists currently to shape the policy in the future. Why it's interesting, it's because it's really not only focused on energy, and because what they try to do is answer to this is a report on transition, systemic transition that are needed, done by the European Environmental Agency. It has been published this summer, but it's already a long time that they are doing a lot of work on trying to have much more systemic thinking and systemic transformative agenda in their policy proposal. But this latest report is really, and I noticed that I just forgot to mention it, to put the link, but I can do that later. This report basically try to look at what is the environmental, the European Environmental Agency's mission, which is about making sure that the European biodiversity is basically sustained into the current political context. The current political context, the one that Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, has put in every mission letter to all the commissioners, is to work on competitiveness, security, and fairness. And this is the new frame to basically do all the policy. And for this, we can then the European Environmental Agency is looking at all the kind of strong principles for action to try to really basically link those overarching objectives to an objective that is looking at the resource. Because for me, the European Environmental Agency is really the resource agency. It's the agency that looks at how we do try to make sure that we still have a resource-wise society in the future, and how we are not jeopardizing the future's generation by just not only overshooting our climate targets, but also overshooting our targets overshooting our consumptions on water, land, material in general. So this, they have tried to look at what is very important if we want to have a good EU policy to anchor this mission of the Environmental Energy Agency into the new political agenda. What they also, then in here it's a lot of text and you don't have to read them, but they really put what is the most important things in their own thinking is that they basically reverse the narrative by saying that actually sufficiency is not an objective per se. It's actually not an objective to reach climate neutrality. It is a tool to tackle all the different challenges, and especially it is the tool, really the tool to ensure fairness and security. This is otherwise, it's also a tool for competitiveness. Basically, what we try to say and what we try to convince the European Commission now is to say, if you want to have energy, because for them in competitiveness, so it's a Draghi report, competitiveness is basically one of the key measures to take is to ensure stability and affordability of energy price, because this is what is basically putting at risk the entire EU economy. If you want to have stability and affordable energy price, there is a very good lever. You just reduce your needs. If an energy price, it's a market price, it's an offer, and it's a supply and a demand. If you reduce demand, everywhere you will reduce demand, everywhere you will reduce your demand on energy, it will imply automatically that energy price will be less at risk or less on the edge, and that you will help the competitiveness of the EU in general. So this is really, when we look at the agenda that is proposed today for the next 5 years, it's very clear that actually sufficiency is at the very core of it. And why I'm referring so much on this report is that actually they really take, it's a little bit long, but frankly speaking, reading it is completely, it's really shaping the policy that we need, and that's exactly what we also had put in the manifesto just before. So it's a big echo of what we had put in the manifesto with all our partners. I'm trying to now go into more examples for you, what it could look like at local level, with 3 main examples, so that we might have a little bit of a time for questions if you have. But there is many. So there is not many, sorry. There is not so many examples of sufficiency plans at local level, because it's really still something difficult. However, so here it's the first example I want to speak about is because of the energy price crisis, but not only, because also of some scarcity in land access and scarcity in water management, then cities have started to question their own public services functioning. And Grenoble, for example, they had a very good sufficiency plan, which I only put some extract on it. It's also in French because it's Grenoble. But they have changed their own internal policy on temperature, indoor temperature. They negotiated with the trade unions. They looked at what was feasible after a year, and after a year, they actually got no specific complaints, and it works for the buildings. So they will apply it now from now on every year. That's one of first of example, but it does also really question the way we deliver public services at local level, and it can really also change. So it's not only the way we deliver, but it can also change the mission of the public services, because we also see today, and you are most probably all very well aware that cities do have a new obligation to provide cooling shelter for people when there is heat waves. This is a new public services that needs to be developed. So public services, it's not linked to sufficiency directly, but there is a need to rethink what the municipalities have to provide to make sure that actually everyone have access to sufficient energy, sufficient, and it's not sufficient in a sense than the reducing need, but the one that you really need for your basic needs: water, energy, land, nature. These are all a cool place to live, or heat during the winter for sure. So these are all new services that needs to be developed in order to be adapted to climate change. The second example, and it's more linked to this specific group. I'm sure you know already about it, so probably I won't go in detail on that. Also, because for that it would require a completely other presentation. But it's the role of local authorities to also help the local economic actors to shift. And to shift to make sure that actually there is a wise use of resources, to shift to be prepared in scarcity of access to resources, and to be prepared to any future. So to be secure, basically. Preparedness is another key new word, but in all the new EU objective and challenges. This is really very big, because it really requires, but that I'm not going to go in depth, because this is exactly the topic of your club. So I'm not going to go more into details. However, I do encourage you, if you just have not yet digged in, but the Brussels example is very, very good in trying to have a super coherent frame to help. Because what they did is, why they did the shifting economy, it's really because they wanted to have a look, how can the municipality and the region use all the incentives they do have for the economic actors into a very wise way, and something that basically to really use all the incentives and the public programs to prepare the economic actors to the world that is coming. So this is really an extremely good example in terms of framing the public action. And the last example I want to share with you is the one that have the luxury to think very, very long term, and to think very systemic. And I'm speaking about Grand Genève. So Geneva, it's like those kind of crazy places where a municipality has a 2 billion positive balance in their budget. So of course it helps to think long term. But nevertheless, what they have done is a very interesting exercise. So they have applied the donut that I'm sure that you're also quite familiar with. The donut economics is really to try to see what can be the minimum social access to the absolutely minimum social rights within the planet boundaries, and what needs to be done to make sure that those two limits, the minimum social limits and the maximum physical limits of the planet, are reached. And they have designed a full action plan for the next 10 years with some concrete indicators for 2050. And I included it here because first their plan is very interesting, and it's also cross-border, so it's very interesting in terms of for any network that is currently working on national exchange. But it's also because they have included in it a specific target to decrease by 5, so to divide by 5 their material footprint at per inhabitant at the level of the province, because it's like a province. And this is very interesting because very few regions or cities have really done the exercise of how much does it really mean. I mean, how much are we really locally overshooting the planet, and decreasing the material by 5? It's far more. I mean, it's very radical. It looks very radical, but it's actually just what we are supposed to do. So that's, I think, it's the best way for me to close the presentation, because I hope that this figure stays in your mind, and that can trigger some either questions, debate, and or future ideas. Thank you very much for your attention.